Welcome to Medicine at the Museum with the University of Michigan Museum of Art. In recent weeks, the Center for Disease Control issued a recommendation that people begin wearing cloth face masks whenever they have to go outside for essential tasks like seeing a doctor or buying food or prescriptions. Many people are sewing masks at home to wear for their own safety and to donate to area medical facilities for staff who need improvised equipment for their personal protection. But for those who don't know how to sew, the search has begun for masks for sale or masks that can be made from materials on hand. The Center for Disease Control provides instructions on its website for masks you can make from home that require no sewing. These instructions and their other advice on masks can be found online at this web address. The CDC website also gives instructions for how to sew a simple cotton mask from home. Because not everyone has a sewing machine at home, and many people who want and need access to cloth masks may not know how to sew by hand. This video edition of Medicine at the Museum will show you how to sew a mask by hand without a sewing machine, even if you've never sewn anything before. Art is often born of necessity. The University of Michigan Museum of Art collection is full of gorgeous fabrics and textiles from all over the world, dating from the 1st century to the present. These objects can be quite delicate and require special care to be safely preserved for future generations. We'll talk a little more about that care later in the video and the surprising amount of sewing that happens behind the scenes at UMMA. But first, let's make a face mask. Because we're all social distancing to slow the spread of COVID-19 in our communities, it's important to not go outside for anything that isn't absolutely essential. For that reason, you can make this mask design without going to the store to buy special fabric with materials you probably already have at home. This is like found object art, a method of creating a new art piece by assembling objects and materials from your environment into a new form. To complete this project, all you will need is a needle and thread and cloth from something like a cotton shirt, tea towel, or a bed sheet that you're willing to repurpose into a mask. Although fabrics and textiles are works of art in their own right, all you really need for this face mask are 2 layers of any fabric that are hardy enough to provide some protection from droplets of coronavirus that may be in the air that you can also comfortably breathe through. The CDC recommends cotton for the sewn mask design on their website. For specific advice on materials and methods, check out the link to the CDC website displayed earlier in this video. We will use one 100% cotton tea towel for this mask. Here's how we'll begin. The first thing you'll want to do is cut 2 pieces of fabric that are roughly 10 by 6 inches each. Here's an image of the instructions from the CDC. We'll make an easy pattern together to help us cut the fabric to the right size. If you don't have a tape measure or a ruler, that's not a problem. You can just estimate or use a standard size sheet of printer or loose leaf paper as a guide for how much to cut. We'll use a pink one so it's easier to see. A sheet of standard printer or loose leaf paper is 8.5 inches by 11 inches, so you can measure the right size for your mask by looking at the shorter edge of a piece of paper and removing about 2.5 inches, and looking at the longer edge of the paper and removing about 1 inch. 1 inch is about the length of a bottle cap or a quarter, which you may have laying around. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just mark your paper at approximately the 10-inch mark on the long side and the 6-inch mark on the short side. Once you have marked both the short and the long sides, fold the paper along those lines to create a 10 by 6 inch rectangle. Gently tear the paper along the folds on both sides, or cut them with scissors. Now, you have your 10 by 6 inch pattern to help you cut the fabric. Next, take the paper and place it on one of the corners of your fabric. Use the paper you have cut as a guide to help you cut out 2 rectangles, which will be the front and back of your mask. Once you have cut your rectangles, you'll want to thread your needle. This is probably the hardest part, but don't worry, you can do it. Your goal is simply to pass the end of the thread through the eye of the needle or the hole at the top. Here's a tip. If the thread won't pass easily through the needle, try wetting it, twisting it, or cutting it to eliminate any frayed edges that may be in the way. Once your thread has made it through the eye of the needle, pull it gently so that the needle rests about halfway down the thread. Now cut the thread from the spool, and you just want to tie the end of the thread together so it doesn't pull through the fabric while you're sewing. Now your needle is ready to start sewing. The first thing you're going to do is take your two pieces of fabric and stack them directly on top of each other. Once they're stacked, if you want to, you can use straight pins to secure your two pieces of fabric together while you sew to make sure the front and back sides of your mask line up. Or you can also use any other kind of clip you may have at home to do this, but you can also just hold the fabric together with your hands and check that the two pieces are lined up as you work. Remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. To sew the two pieces of fabric together, start by sticking your needle through both pieces of fabric near one of the corners and slowly pull the thread all the way through until you feel a gentle pull from the knot you tied in the thread. Once you've done that, just do it again, this time from the opposite side. Pull it all the way through, and now you've made your first stitch. To sew a line all the way to the edge of the fabric, just keep pushing the needle through the two pieces of cloth, alternating, pushing it into and out of the front and back, keeping the stitches a little bit close together for a snug fit. Just keep going down the edge of the fabric. Now if you start to run out of thread on your needle, don't worry, just tie it off like this. Or if it's too short to tie with the needle still attached, like this. Tie and cut the thread as close to the fabric as you can. Now just thread the needle again and begin where you left off. You will keep stitching the two pieces of fabric together by repeating a line of stitches along each of the four edges. Once your two pieces of fabric are sewn together along all four sides, tie the thread off and cut it a final time, and you're ready for the next step. We're going to add pleats or folds to the mask now that will make it feel more roomy when you wear it and provide a little more protection from the extra folds of cloth. Here's how to do it. First, look at the shorter side of your mask and measure or approximate a mark about 1.5 inches from the top. Make a fold at the 1.5 inch point on the side of the fabric and pinch the fold to hold it in place so that it covers about 1/2 inch of the fabric behind it. You can pinch the fold in place either with your fingers, a pin, or a clip. Next, begin sewing a line down the edge of the fabric just like you did before, but this time going over the folded edge of the cloth like a speed bump. This will hold your pleat in place. Once you've sewn over your first fold, add another by measuring down again by about 1.5 inches and pinching that into a fold that goes down again by about 1/2 inch. Now continue sewing your line over the second speed bump of the pleat. Use extra thread to make this pleated edge stronger. Next, you just repeat the same process on the opposite side. Once you've finished your pleats, you can tie and cut off the remaining thread. You have finished the main part of your face mask. Finally, you will need to attach ties to the corners of the fabric so you can begin wearing the mask. It's not necessary to use elastic for the ties, although you're welcome to do so. Again, think creatively about materials you may have at home. Clean shoestrings, cloth belts, or strong ribbon will all work. A good source of material for mask ties is the seam of a piece of fabric cut out from a t-shirt, cloth napkin, or sheet. We will cut our ties for this mask from the seams of a cloth table napkin. Remember, Using materials you already have at home saves you a trip to the store and protects cashiers and delivery drivers from the risks of non-essential exposure. To remove the seam from a cloth napkin, a sheet, or an old shirt, use your scissors to cut the reinforced seam away from the main part of the fabric until the seam is completely separated. Thread your needle and sew your ties directly into each corner of the mask. Your stitches don't need to be beautiful, but make enough of them so that the connection to the mask is strong. Also be sure your ties are long enough to comfortably tie the mask onto your face. At this point, your mask is ready to wear. If you want to, you can add decorative edging or other details, but that isn't necessary for a simple and safe cotton mask. Make sure your nose and mouth are well covered by the mask, and remember that the CDC warns that cloth face coverings should not be placed on young children under age 2, anyone who has trouble breathing or is unconscious, incapacitated, or otherwise unable to remove the mask without assistance. Your mask is now ready to wear. A surprising amount of sewing has taken place behind the scenes at UMMA over the years as collections and exhibitions technicians work hard to preserve our textiles for future generations. The University of Michigan Museum of Art houses textiles from around the world dating from the 1st century of the Common Era to the present. Every textile requires a unique strategy to protect its delicate fibers based on what materials it is made from and the condition it was in when it entered the museum's collection. Several years ago, UMMA collections and exhibitions technician Kate Holoka recognized an opportunity to better protect the museum's Japanese kimono collection and all of our other textiles based on her knowledge of traditional methods of housing. Kate is here to talk with us about her design of sewn enclosures for the UMMA kimono and give us a behind-the-scenes peek into the work that goes into protecting the collection. For our viewers, I am with Kate Holoka, who is a collections and exhibitions technician at UMMA, and she has agreed to talk with us a little bit today about the textiles that she cares for at the museum and a sewing project that the museum undertook a few years ago to protect them. Kate, can you tell us a little bit about what you do at UMMA?
Yes, like you said, I'm a collections and exhibition technician, which means I kind of have two roles at UMMA. I help install the exhibits, but I also maintain objects in storage, and I prepare objects for display. So it might include a lot of matting and framing, lighting in the galleries, and just keeping the storage spaces organized and ensuring the safety of objects throughout the museum.
And what kind of textiles do you work with?
Well, UMMA has hundreds of textiles in its collection, including kimono, which are of a particular interest to me.
And what is it about the kimono that sparks your interest?
Well, I actually majored in Japanese in college, so I've been interested in Japanese culture for years now. And kimono in particular, I just think are beautiful garments, and I feel really fortunate to get to work with so many in UMMA's collection.
And I know that you've shared some photographs with us of a project that you did to help protect the UMMA's kimono collection and then the other textiles as well. Can you share a little bit about how you got the idea?
Sure. Kimonos are stored folded in specific ways depending on the type of garment. What's ingenious about this is that the creases caused by folding fall right at the seams of the garment, so it hides any wrinkles that might happen in that folding. And then kimonos are traditionally wrapped in washi paper called tatoshi, and these papers make it easy for a person to store the kimonos, so when the kimono are layered in drawers, they can leave through the kimono without them falling apart, becoming disheveled, and creating wrinkles that you don't want. And then the other advantage of the tatoshi is that they keep the kimono clean and they provide necessary ventilation. So moisture doesn't get trapped in with the silk, which could lead to mold.
Right. So there are a lot of things that can actually damage the fabrics that we don't think about sometimes. You mentioned moisture. What other kinds of things do you have to look out for at the museum specifically for kimono and other textiles?
Well, the museum is actually humidity controlled. So the idea of the Tatoshi protecting the kimono from humidity is less important in that setting. But they also keep the kimono clean. They protect it from any dust particulates that could be in the air, and as well as light. As we know, light can fade colors over time.
Right.
So basically, I kind of took this idea of the Tatoshi, or the paper wrapping, and applied it to all the textiles in our collection. But instead of paper, we use natural 100% cotton muslin that's unbleached, unsized, and it's a breathable material.
Right.
So any material that you have come in direct contact with art objects, you want to make sure is of high quality, acid-free, and this muslin is basically UMMA, using a sewing machine, created hundreds of custom muslin enclosures that we've been fabricating over the years as the collection has grown. And when I say custom made, I mean each object has to be measured to ensure that the enclosure does its job properly. So you don't want it to be too loose. It could cause the textile to just kind of slip apart in handling. And then you don't want it to be too tight because it can cause bunching and wrinkles that you don't want.
Right. And I think at the museum, too, we have to think about a very long lifespan for our objects. So that one wrinkle could actually, over the course of years, if it's sitting there, could actually cause damage in a way that we don't really think about for our own personal clothing or textiles.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, the muslin enclosures that you designed are actually really beautiful in their own right. They're fabric envelopes, and I'm curious how you thought through the design process of how they should come together to protect the object without causing damage.
Well, first, I have to look at the object, and I have to assess where is it safe, if it's safe to fold a textile, and if it is safe, where do those folds fall? And so the first thing I do is think about what's the best way to store the object. And in kimono case, there's a specific way to fold it. And so I'll fold it that way. And then I'll take a measurement of that kimono and create an enclosure that allows that folding to be maintained. And that's another nice thing about the enclosures is that if you have other people going through the collection and pulling objects, you want to ensure that that object gets refolded in the best and safest way. And the enclosure helps inform the person how to return it back the way they found it, if that makes sense.
That's wonderful. There's also something that's amazing. I, as you know, work as an art handler at UMMA, and every time we need to pull one of the kimono or other textiles, there is this incredibly precise way that they're stored, and you can see the respect, the absolute respect for these objects that we have. And I'm really impressed with your knowledge base about how to treat the objects and how to fold them so that they are safe and well housed. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about where you got your training and how to work with these objects.
Oh, that's a great question, actually. I'm really, just passionate about objects and storage. I think it's important that things look clean and organized because it inspires other people who approach those objects to do the same. So it's not just important looks-wise, but it's important just as basic methodology. And the kimono, I've been fortunate enough to work with our Asian art curator and also see kimono in real life just from being in Japan and talking to people with kimono. And that's where I developed an understanding of why it's important to fold things in a certain way and what's the best way to preserve the kimono for years and years to come.
That's amazing. Well, thank you. Here we can see one example of a muslin enclosure Kate designed to protect a kimono in the collection. Thank you for joining the University of Michigan Museum of Art for Medicine at the Museum.